Hi everybody, this is Jennifer Schaus and we are coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us in our webinar series covering the FAR. This is the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or the rulebook for government contracting. Our webinars are held typically on Wednesdays and Fridays unless there's a holiday or an upcoming holiday weekend, which is the case for this coming Friday. So this week we are only having a webinar on Wednesday. All of our webinars are complimentary and recorded unless otherwise noted. You'll find today's recording on our YouTube channel along with almost 700 other government contracting videos. The PowerPoints are posted over on slideshare.net and you can log in there with your LinkedIn credentials. If you want to sign up for the series, unfortunately there is no bulk registration. If you navigate over to our website and select the section called the FAR, you'll find the recordings there, but you can also register for the webinars that we have yet to cover. In the event that you are anxious to dig into a topic that we have yet to cover, we did actually cover the FAR back in 2020. So if you navigate to the section called webinars and scroll down to the FAR 2020, you'll find all of those recordings there. Just keep in mind that these are 4 years old. Some of the regulations have changed over the years. A little bit about us. We do provide consulting for established government contractors, primarily focused on helping them get onto the GSA schedule. Some of the other services we provide are listed here. And we'll talk about some of those in a moment, including the services that we provide for companies that are targeting government contractors. We've got advertising options in our newsletter, webinar advertising, we've got event sponsorship, and we do have an event coming up June 24th at the Kennedy Center. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Our newsletter advertising includes reaching over 30,000, I think it said this morning, 30,300 subscribers, most of which are government contractors. And then you've got some stats here on our open and click rates. If you want a media kit, just send us an email. Some of the other contract vehicles that we can help you with are listed here on this page. If you have questions or need help, shoot us an email. And here's what we've got for upcoming this week and into June, some of the Senate and House hearings over on Capitol Hill. These are always, at times, I think good to be aware of. And if you're local to the DC metro area, they can also be helpful to attend and get some insight into budget requests and kind of how that money is going to be allocated, and also just good networking information. Okay, we've got some complimentary webinars coming up. We did one yesterday with the Eastern Michigan Apex Accelerator, and so here's the schedule for those. Next, I think it is in 2 weeks, June 4th, we're doing a basic marketing guide with the Eastern Michigan Apex Accelerator. Again, the slides will be sent out to you, so you can click on these links when you get the slides. For the next couple months out through November, we've got 2 webinars with the Virginia Apex Accelerator on GSA schedules and one on marketing. And then our speaker today, Carrie Palmatier, is actually going to join us, and the dates got covered here, but it's Thursday, June 20th, and then the subsequent Thursday, June 27th, part 1 and 2 on SBIRs. Those are listed on our website under events, even though these are webinars. These are going to be great webinars and very informative. As I mentioned, we've got an event coming up June 24th over at the Kennedy Center. You do need tickets in advance, and this probably will sell out. We're expecting 300 to 400 federal contractors. And we've got some federal agencies on board. This list will be updated as the government and sponsors confirm. Currently, we've got Department of Defense, NAVAIR, as well as USAID. Capital Bank is one of our sponsors, as well as our event partner, BidSpeed, and you'll also find the Virginia Apex Accelerator there. Okay, now we want to thank our webinar sponsors. These folks and organizations make it possible for our webinars to be provided complimentary to you. So we want to thank our friends at GovEvents. That's the premier platform for posting events related to government and government contracting. You can find all of our webinars and our events on govevents.com. as well as recordings from our past almost 700 webinars. We also want to thank Tom Johnson and his team at Set Aside Alert. That's the go-to publication for contracting opportunities for small women-owned, veteran-owned, HUBZone, and 8A firms. Visit setasidealert.com for more information. And the Fairfax Economic Development Authority has an online calendar of events and webinars. We want to thank them for posting our events and webinars on their calendar. The Virginia Apex Accelerator at George Mason University offers free one-on-one counseling to established government contracting firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore their services, review homework recommendations, register for live training, and find useful links to agencies and other self-directed learning. One-on-one counseling is limited to eligible client companies. Appointment requests are handled in the order they were received and based on counselor availability due to high demand. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. The Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce Monthly Government Contracting Council holds a meeting allowing you to network with contracting peers, learn about upcoming events, opportunities, and also contribute to future programming. The meetings take place the fourth Tuesday of each month at 8:30 a.m. at the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, May 28th. That's next week, 8:30 to 9:30. Alicia Field has moved on from the Reston Chamber. We'll get you a new contact, point of contact for that slide. But if you hop over to the website for the Reston Chamber, you can find more details about that event. BidSpeed. Do you want help winning government contracts? BidSpeed can help. Users can find bidding opportunities from federal, state, and local government. Additionally, you can search for teaming partners, incumbent point of contact, expiring contracts, compliance matrix, and also proposal templates. Create your login today at bidspeed.com. BidSpeed is an official partner of the US SBA's ETG Empower to Grow program. The FBC event for the Ultimate Engagement Channel to bring government and industry together. 68% of government personnel report that they attend more than one event each year. FBC has worked with government and industry for 45 plus years to create gatherings where ideas are shared and to help government achieve its goals. This includes agency industry days, cybersecurity symposiums, tech expos, and offsite meetings. FBC provides full life cycle meeting planning and event management. With over 5,000 meetings under their belt, FBC has the experience, systems, and personnel to make your next event exceptional. Learn more at fbcinc.com. Last but not least, GovBrew. Please check out our friends over at GovBrew. GovBrew is the most read government contracting newsletter, keeping thousands of government contracting professionals in the loop with news, updates, and opportunities in the federal contracting market. All in a fun and accessible email that only takes 5 minutes to read. It's 100% free to join. It goes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. It's filled with great content, event postings, webinars, and more. We encourage you to sign up at govbrew.co, or you can use the QR code you see on the screen. Okay, the reason that we're here today is to talk about the FAR, specifically FAR Part 35. We are joined by Carrie Palmatier, again, who's going to speak about FAR Part 35, R&D contracting. Carrie has put together great slides. We're very lucky to have her with us. Carrie, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to put myself on mute and then just let me know when you're ready for your next slide.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody, because I'm in Colorado, so it is still morning. My name is Carrie Palmatier, as Jennifer introduced me, and I am a small firm in the middle of the country who's helping small businesses do business with the U.S. government. I'm a certified WASB, SDO, BOSB, and I work with a lot of the high-tech R&D companies that are startups and getting into the government contracting area. I pretty much handle all aspects of government contracts in the FAR, grants, cooperative agreements, other transactions, etc., except for I do not litigate, and I really prefer not to handle construction. So otherwise, I can handle and small business requirements and everything else. So I do actually do a lot of R&D contracting, so this was a great topic for me. Next slide. Okay, so what is FAR Part 35? FAR Part 35 is the specific area of the FAR that talks and provides guidance on how to purchase research and development services. So it sets forth its special policies and procedures for research and development. The primary purpose of R&D programs are to advance scientific and technical knowledge and apply knowledge to achieve agency and national goals. So this is dealing with some very, at least to me, highly technical, maybe not always, advanced science type of activities. And the key difference because of this is that R&D requirements are less defined than your normal government contract requirements. It's not even like saying, hey, we want you to accomplish this goal. It's we want you to explore whether a specific concept is feasible. We usually call the initial phases of R&D a proof of concept. Is there even, would it even work? Does the scientific idea even have any value to it? And that's a key element in what we're going to be talking about this morning with R&D contracting. So the objectives of R&D contracting are that they can't precisely be described in advance. We can say what type of research we want them to do and what we hope the goals will be, the results will be, but we can't say we want you to perform these services, we want you to deliver this product. We're not going to have that kind of definition in the requirements. We also may not succeed. Not every research project ends up with a successful result. Sometimes the answer is it wasn't feasible. So it's a very amorphous area of government contracting. The other thing I want to point out is throughout the presentation, I will try to emphasize where FAR Part 35 works together with other sections of the FAR, and especially if it applies in lieu of another section of the FAR. Because this is a unique area, but the FAR still applies. Next slide. Okay, so again, we're dealing in high-tech areas, advanced technologies, scientific areas. So we're not going to be sending out and allowing for competition from just every company in the world or every entity in the world. Contracting officers are encouraged to obtain the best sources from within the scientific and industrial community. That may not be the traditional government contractors or entities that receive grants and awards. They're supposed to go find other entities and individuals throughout the scientific and industrial community. They're supposed to provide an environment to allow for that creative research and a minimum administrative burden. Some agencies are more flexible than others, and so you should look at your agency supplements when you're looking at it. Also within an agency, there are certain offices that are more used to dealing with R&D than others. So it's an area where we're encouraged to bring in non-traditional type entities so we can have new ideas. And then to meet this goal, agencies don't just post on sam.gov and say, hey, we got another procurement coming up. They're supposed to be out there publicizing the need early through sam.gov, but also collaborating, bringing in your technical contracting officers and making available agency contact information for how to get involved. And I want to highlight one thing here. In the FAR presentation, FAR Part 15 presentation I did, I noted that the contracting officers can actually be the only entity who evaluates a proposal or the only individual who evaluates a proposal. In the R&D field, they must bring in their technical team. And we'll talk more about that. Next slide. So the R&D requires these highly technical qualified performers. And there's what they look for is what other work have they done? What is their overall professional stature and reputation? Do they publish? What's their, are they on speaking engagements? What kind of scientific research have they been doing, etc. So this is where the government, you'll see them often attending trade shows and conferences and technical association meetings because the technical people within the government are trying to connect with the technical people in industry. And then the contracting officers are encouraged to conduct market research for other ideas. So in other words, hey, we want to have this research idea done. They're supposed to be going to look at the patent PTO listings, other field listings, and they may assign this to their technical people, but to see what other research has been done in this area. A lot of research, especially that within universities and research institutes, is published. So it's public information, or it's publicly known. Now, in the normal government contracting process, the government posts that a solicitation is available and anybody can apply. In here, an R&D field, the contracting officers can initially distribute solicitations to a limited group of sources who are technically qualified in that specific field. So this is an authorized limitation in the quantity of sources that can be sought. It is not an exemption under FAR Part 6 because it's not following the same set of rules. Next slide. And if soliciting to a wide variety of sources is going to result in too many proposals to evaluate efficiently, they may only solicit a reasonable number. Reasonable is not always well defined. Now, however, if somebody comes in and they're qualified and they say, I want an opportunity to compete, they must furnish a copy of that solicitation and allow that qualified source to compete. So it's an effective limitation that has a door that allows for anybody to come in and say, give me a copy of that solicitation, I want to compete. Again, they have to be qualified to do that type of research and development depending upon what the field is. Another thing is that if contractors have a technology that they think is of interest to a government agency and they developed it at private expense, and this is a direct quote out of the FAR, there should be no hesitancy to discuss it. Just that the concern has to be on notice that the government may not award a contract from it. So they can't guarantee anything. But you can open up conversations. And we keep seeing this trend where the government had become afraid to have conversations with contractors. And it's okay to have conversations. Government and contractors can have conversations. And as I noted in the FAR Part 15 presentation, just not after the formal proposals, the formal solicitations have dropped. So have a conversation. If the government is interested in the technology, they have two options. They can treat it as an unsolicited proposal under FAR Part subpart 15.6, or they can justify a sole source award to it under an exemption to competition rules in FAR Part 6. But the sole source justification has to meet three elements. It has to be unique and innovative, not otherwise available to the government, and does not resemble the substance of a pending competitive acquisition. So if you have a unique technology, don't wait until the government starts doing its public market research and request for information and starts having public postings of it, because now it's the substance of a pending competitive acquisition. So we protect our proprietary, but don't wait too long. Next slide. Contract types. Okay, so this was FAR Part 16. One thing of note is that many of the civilian agencies actually use grants and cooperative agreements, which are not FAR-based contracts, because that's what government is supposed to use when the principal purpose is to stimulate or support research and development for public purpose. Not for a specific government solution, but for public purpose. FAR-based contracts are only if the government is buying a product or service, including R&D, for a governmental purpose. So if the purpose of the R&D is to enhance the public knowledge of some new idea in research, then a grant or cooperative agreement may be more reasonable. But the FAR-based contracts are if they are buying a technology that will be used for the government and that government agency intends to buy. So R&D is not always bought through the FAR. Generally speaking, as we've talked so far, the specifications are so imprecise and the goals are not known. We don't know how long it's going to take, how many tests will have to be run, how much research will have to be done. So the general preference within the R&D world is for cost reimbursement type contracts. And there may be even a cost sharing requirement where the contractor has to contribute a portion of its own cost to the research and development project. Next slide. We've heard before so far in at least one of the other presentations that there's a general preference for fixed price contracts in the government FAR-based contracts world. That preference will still apply to R&D, but only once and if the goals objective specifications and cost estimates are sufficient to permit that fixed price estimates. So think about it from a contractor's perspective. Is the scope fixed enough that I can price it on a fixed price basis? And that's going to depend upon the precision of the goals and the performance objectives. So for one research project, it may be possible, and for another one, it may not be possible. It's a subjective standard. If you can specify the levels of effort, hey, we estimate that this will take 1,000 hours, it's not going to take more than 1,200 hours, you've got an idea. Short duration, quantity of people, not a major research project. Small projects that are well defined, those are fixed price. And I'm going to emphasize this because one of my favorite areas of research is the SBIR program, which is I'm talking about next month. And that's because these fit within these exceptions for fixed price, where the levels of effort and they're short, small projects. The government can use fixed price incentive and cost plus incentive fee contracts in that order of preference to help control cost. Next slide. Okay, so preparing solicitations. Preparing solicitations is not done the same way as your standard FAR Part 15 type solicitations. FAR Part 15 with negotiations is the normal process we're going to follow. We're not going to follow FAR Part 14 because it's too vague. You can't do does everybody meet the exact requirements and who's the lowest price? It's not going to fit for R&D projects. We're going to follow something that's going to resemble more of the FAR Part 15 process. For complex efforts, contracting officers are supposed to provide offerors an opportunity to comment on the details, the scope, the work statement, specifications. This is the opportunity for when potential awardees can ask the questions. Hey, what about this way of doing it? What about if we use another lab? Can we do this? What is it that you want, government? What kind of outcomes are you expecting? This is the time frame to have those dialogues. Make sure you get involved. Contracting officers may actually require proposals be organized in a specific way. So in other words, don't allow everybody to submit their own proposal structured in their own way because it's harder for the technical team to evaluate. But mandate a specific outline format that says that here's what you have to provide in this order template so that the technical team knows where all the information is located. If that is required in your solicitation, please follow it, because if you don't follow it, you could end up getting a negative evaluation simply because they couldn't find your information. So it's done as a way to help make the process more efficient. You are also, they can permit you to propose an alternative contract type. So if they've proposed cost reimbursement and you want fixed price or some other variations, but watch to make sure that that is allowed. If you want to propose an alternative contract type, use the time frame where there's comments to ask for that to be added as an alternative to see if the government would be willing to consider it. Next slide. Okay, so evaluation factors. Usually we have cost, past performance, technical. Here we're going to have management capability, experience and past performance, subcontracting, and some other significant evaluation criteria. There's some flexibility in there. What's mandated is that offerors must describe the technical and management approach to the R&D. Identify technical uncertainties. So that's going to require you to have done some level of research in advance to see what uncertainties you may have, and then provide any resolution for some of those uncertainties. So you are giving them a base outline of your R&D methods, goals, scope as part of your proposal. So because again, this highly scientific technical work, your subcontractors will be scrutinized. And I'm not talking about where you buy your beakers and labs and materials for testing. I mean, other individuals who are performing the R&D. They are going to be scrutinized at the same level as the prime awardees. So make sure that who you evaluate, who you want to bring onto your team will qualify And especially if they're going to be bringing in some scientific capability that you don't have in-house, and emphasize that their information has to be disclosed. And they have to provide a very detailed proposal as to their capabilities too. The contracting officer is supposed to evaluate not just the prime, but that same level of detail into the subcontractors who are going to be performing the R&D. Next slide. So the solicitation, we talked about what the solicitation must include. It should include some other evaluation factors to assess how well does the company understand the scope of work. Is their research got any, are their proposed research idea have any validity? Does it look like it's a solid method? Not that it's going to, the answer will be affirmed, but that the scientific method is tested and that it's understood, their capability, etc. So I'm going to recommend one thing for you to think about. Even if these evaluation factors aren't included in your solicitation, to think about addressing these concepts in your proposal to persuade the government that your solution has the highest merit. Now we've talked about technical capability, we've talked about evaluation, your subcontractors. Now we're going to talk about cost. Unlike other contracts, cost is not a controlling factor. It can't be disregarded, but it's not a controlling factor because, again, the research may not work. So what they're going to be looking at is, can this entity accomplish the research at a fair and reasonable cost? But just so that you're aware, it's because of these unknowns, cost is not as important as the technical solution. Next slide. The statement of work. Okay. We're used to drafting statements of work that say we want this work done by, we want X number of people to attend in a meeting, we want this product that meets these specifications. That's not what an R&D statement of work will look like. Instead, an R&D statement of work will say, this is the type of research we want done, here's the types of ideas we want tested, and here's the final report or outcome summary that we want to receive. So it's a balance here because you have to draft the government's going to have to draft a statement of work that's clear and complete, still accomplishes the R&D objectives, but is not so restrictive that the contractors can't propose differing methods and ideas to exercise their innovation and creativity. So it's a more of a delicate balance. And in the end, you could end up with contractors having different statements of work because of their different methods, scientific research, and goals that they're going to be accomplishing. Statements of work, R&D scope, can have two different types. There's two basic different types of R&D: basic research and development and applied research. By the way, the definitions are at the end of the presentation, so they're there if you ever need them. But it's a key area because basic research is fundamental research. It's open, it's testing of ideas. It can, many of them end up in textbooks, etc. Development and applied research is when you start taking the scientific theory and applying it to a real world problem. One of the key areas of this is that sometimes there is a correlation between basic research and development or applied research and whether the research is subject to export control rules or even the controlled unclassified information requirements, where basic research may not be export controlled and may not be subject to those cybersecurity requirements, but applied research often is. So that is a big driver in the level of compliance and capability of who can perform the work. The statement of work should describe the area of exploration. What is the scientific theory? What kinds of tasks do you want done? What are the overall objectives for the R&D? The government is going to provide any background information that it knows, any factors that could be a constraint that it is aware of. So in other words, before the government can draft the statement of work, it has to have done its own research also. It can't just say, hey, we don't know what we want, please provide us a statement of work. They have to think about it too. This requires that the government people, again, as we talked about so far, that the government people interact and coordinate with the contractors on a technical level to understand what's happening in the world and what types of research can be done. Next slide. Usually, so R&D is phased. We talked about basic versus applied, but there's also phases. Proof of concept is an early phase. You do some more tests, and then eventually you get to a prototype, first test articles, etc. For the early phases, the deliverables are usually reports, meetings, data. It's not until you get to the later phases where the research has been proven that it would work, and you could start going into making prototypes or even starting production that you're going to get into hard deliverables. With software, a lot of the times you'll have a summary of what the software can do. A prototype will be a demonstration of the software. So those are going to be phases, and you can have these as set up within the same contract or as different contracts. I am going to tie in that the deliverables, one of the things that the government always needs to be careful of is making sure that it specifies the deliverables, because if it's funding the research, usually the government will get unlimited rights to the R&D created, the intellectual property created in the performance of the R&D. But they have to require it be delivered. Otherwise, they have unlimited rights to something that they don't have in their possession. So with R&D contracts, your Part 27 lecture on intellectual property, data rights, and patents, etc., is very much connected. And what is the scope and what are the deliverables are going to be playing in together. And that goes into the fact that the agencies are supposed to make contract results available to other government agencies and stored in a centralized location, reminding ourselves that taxpayers, every single one of us on this phone call is funding this R&D work through our tax dollars. So the nation as a whole should benefit from this. Having said that, unlimited rights, occasionally contractors will bring their own pre-existing software or own pre-existing intellectual property, or with SBIR contracts. So it could have the government may not get unlimited rights to all of the intellectual property created, but it is, generally speaking, the government will have unlimited rights to the work results of the Part 35 R&D projects. Next slide. Evaluating proposals. An R&D contract should be awarded to the offeror who proposes the best idea or concept and has the highest competence. Again, price is not part of that formula. What you can't do, though, as the government, is that they can't add in additional requirements to eliminate some of the competitors. They have to only include capabilities that are needed for the successful performance. An overlap is that if a small business competes and is determined not to be responsible, not capable, not lower ranked, but not responsible, you still have to follow the certificate of competency procedures in Part 19. Also, evaluation proposals are supposed to be evaluated against the solicitation factors, not against each other. Because again, you're asking for different solutions. You're asking for apples and oranges, so you can't rate them against each other. You have to rate them against the solicitation criteria. The procedures in subpart 15.5 for notification and debriefing are optional. So they should use those procedures. They're not required to use those procedures to notify and debrief offerors. And then making sure that when the government does evaluate the cost or price estimate, that they're looking to see that the offeror understands the project. They're not woefully underbid, and they understand the risk and ability to organize. Next slide. So BAAs, these are unique. They only are used in the R&D field. Basically what they are is that the government has a broad agency announcement. So in other words, it posts out an announcement, usually annually, that says, here is theoretically the types of research projects that we are interested in. And companies can submit proposals to it. It's state-of-the-art, increasing knowledge. They're really only used when you have a quantity of meaningful proposals that you're anticipating. But again, the evaluation will be based on technical capability, funds, and extent appropriate. So the government could evaluate them and find that there are 20 different proposals that are excellent, but there's only funding for the first 15. So that's the BAAs are a unique area for R&D. Next slide. When doing a BAA, the contracting officer still has to publish the BAA, at least annually. They're also supposed to publish in noted scientific, technical, or engineering periodicals. And I'm going to relate back to the fact that we're supposed to be finding as many people in the mathematical, technical, scientific fields to do the R&D. This is in lieu of. So the government in doing R&D under a BAA does not have to follow the FAR Part 5.2 requirements for publication. They follow these requirements. And describing the criteria for the proposals, period of time during which proposals will be accepted. So in other words, hey, the BAA is open and proposals can be submitted for the next 4 weeks. That's the kind of information that'll be in a BAA. And then the instructions, the normal solicitation instructions for how to prepare and submit them. Next slide. Again, similarly to the other issues, they have to be evaluated consistent with the evaluation criteria. Your technical team has to be involved, and you have to document the evaluations that were conducted. Next slide. Property, FAR Part 45 still applies. So if it's a cost reimbursement, the government's going to own the property. Title can vest. One of the interesting things is that for the R&D projects, there's a unique statute that applies that before you can have title to any property purchased under the R&D contract, you have to agree not to discriminate. And that's an implied representation. Next slide. Okay, transitioning. How do you move from R&D to production? Ideally, successful R&D contracts can and should lead to production. We get to an actual follow-on recurring maintenance type service or product. We get that once we have the results are showing a high degree of probability that the technology is feasible and that the government knows how many or what its minimum requirements are going to be and its performance objectives are going to be. So in other words, the research process can shape how the government follow-on production requirements are shaped. Once you get to that stage, it should progress from cost to fixed price. The exact timing will depend upon the degree, at what point in time the level of certainty is there to make that shift. One thing that the government is supposed to think about early in the R&D process, and this is where I mentioned the data rights earlier, is that if the government's going to have unlimited rights, to require the development of a technical package to allow for other companies to compete for that production follow-on. Because again, the government has unlimited rights to it, even if it only had government purpose rights. And the idea being that to compete for the follow-on production, because it's not proprietary to a specific company. Next slide. Okay, so within R&D, one of our common awardees, either at a prime level or even as a subcontractor, are educational institutions and nonprofit organizations, research institutions. They have additional requirements because they are unique, and the FAR has recognized that they have a special status. If the institution is the prime, it has the primary responsibility for the research. So in other words, the government's not going to stand over its shoulders and tell it how to do the research, but they have to have approval to make any changes. Usually with working with educational institutions and nonprofits, there is an individual that is being proposed who has that background and that unique capability. That person will be the principal investigator and will be responsible for the overall performance of the research. That principal investigator will be listed by name. This can happen even in a for-profit awardee, but it's very, very common in an educational research institution. That individual will usually have to devote a certain amount of time to the project and will be responsible, and their background will be checked. If they leave or if something happens and they need to be replaced, the government will have to approve that replacement and will be looking at that replacement's background, resume, capabilities also. One other unique aspect is that many universities are, your public universities are actually state entities. So they are subject to sovereign immunity. This creates a little bit of a dichotomy, and we see it often in insurance requirements or other indemnification type requirements. So when you get a request, if you're the prime and you're trying to work with a state institution and you get some pushback from an insurance requirement, or if you're the government and the state institution awardee says we're not taking those requirements, it's legit. And it requires that the federal government and the state government work together. Next slide. There's special property rules for educational institutions, nonprofits. If you're one, you can read the slide. Next slide. FFRDCs, one of my favorite entities. I even kind of like saying the acronym FFRDCs. Kind of rolls off the tongue. What are they, and why do we have them? If you haven't heard of them, you've heard of them by name. The Aerospace Corporation, MITRE, RAND, even the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Their FFRDCs are everywhere. If you haven't heard the name, you've heard of one of them at least. But they exist. They are a special entity, and they exist to provide special long-term research or development need, which can't be met in-house in the government or through other contractors. And they enable the agency to use the private sector to augment its capabilities. So it creates a trusted relationship between the government and these FFRDCs. The government agency that establishes the FFRDC is called a sponsor, and there's a sponsoring agreement. The FFRDC will exist as an entity, but it'll be operated, managed, or administered by another entity, usually like a university, consortium of universities, some other not-for-profit or nonprofit, or even an industrial firm. If they are part of, let's say, a university, they have to operate separately and autonomously from the parent university. So they are not a subsidiary. It's a university-run organization, but they operate on its own and not subject to the board of directors. You can actually have multiple agencies sponsor one FFRDC, but one agency has to be the primary sponsor. Next slide. So the FFRDCs and their sponsors have a trusted relationship. It's a trusted insider because the FFRDCs are going to come in and see the government information and the government goals and insights. And by allowing that access, the sponsors then have, the FFRDCs have special obligations beyond that what is normal if you're a government contract supporter. And that's because they're getting access to information and it's a long-term relationship. So one of the restrictions on FFRDCs is that they can't use this information and access that they have to compete with the private sector. They have to conduct their business in a manner befitting that special relationship. They have to operate with objectivity and independence, be free from organizational conflicts, and disclose to the sponsor everything that they're doing. So if you are trying to set up a team to do an R&D work, you might be able to leverage an FFRDC's capabilities with restrictions. And that is that, one, everything you're doing with them will be subject to disclosure with the sponsor, not just the buyer, but the sponsor. And the company, the agency that's issuing the solicitation is going to award the contract may restrict use of FFRDCs. They may say no FFRDCs may be used because FFRDCs have this special unique relationship, they're not for profit, etc. Or the sponsor could say, no, we don't want that FFRDC doing that work. So if you intend to work with an FFRDC, make sure they go do this groundwork to be ensured that they're going to be allowed or find an alternative source. Next slide. We've talked about the strong tie. FFRDCs can exist for decades sitting next to the government. They hire PhDs, high-tech individuals, high quality, people who can understand the R&D being performed. They are objective and independent. They help draft government requirements, testing requirements, and scrutiny. If you want to see all of the FFRDCs that exist, there's the link. The National Science Foundation maintains that list, and sponsors provide the information back. Next slide. I'm going to go fast through the establishment because it doesn't happen very fast, but basically there's a big process by which an FFRDC is created. It is not quick, it is not easy, and new FFRDCs are not created very frequently. Next slide. And in fact, for DoD, NASA, and DHS, there's an additional restriction that has been in place since for any R&Ds, FFRDCs that didn't exist before 1986. And that requires congressional notification. Next slide. Okay, so there's a written agreement between the sponsor and the FFRDC. It states what the FFRDC may do, what its general purpose is, its mission is, and whether or not it can perform non-sponsor work. The agreement is usually 5 years. It can be renewed in increments not to exceed 5 years. So it's a 5-year review period. It has to go through a periodic review, which the criteria are laid out for, but many of these FFRDCs have been managed by the same entity for decades. Next slide. The written agreement also has to have how you're going to terminate it, any idea, what happens to their earnings, the prohibition on competing, and whether non-sponsor work can be accepted and how. And then what cost elements, what subject, how it's going to set up its cost accounting standards equivalent for review by the government. Next slide. Okay, the fun part. So I've hinted at it already. FFRDCs may perform work for others than the sponsor. If it's another government agency, it'll be under the Economy Act or some other law. And if it's work for a third-party non-governmental entity, it'll be under some other applicable legislation. I say this because some of the FFRDCs are also federal labs with authority to do work for non-governmental entities. So sometimes you can use them, like the Jet Propulsion Lab is a laboratory, a federal lab that's operated as an FFRDC. So it's allowed to sell some of its laboratory facilities and individuals under its legislation as a federal lab. But the sponsor has to allow it. So NASA is the sponsor, and NASA monitors when the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, does its work for other entities. If another government agency wants to use the FFRDC like an FFRDC, so to provide that consulting and that insight, then it does it under the Economy Act, and the non-sponsor shall provide all the information, the determination and findings, and everything to support an Economy Act activity. Next slide. The periodic review requirements, similar to an establishment, there has to be a need for it. It's worth the money and the cost, and that has to be done every 5 years. Next slide. It's possible a sponsor could say, you know what, we just really haven't been using you. We don't need you anymore. But then it needs to tell other agencies who have been using it and give them a chance to assume sponsorship. And if there is no other need for it, then an FFRDC should be phased out and terminated. One way or the other, at the end of those periodic reviews, it's the head of the sponsor who has to approve the continuation or termination. So again, FFRDCs are operating at a pretty high level with a lot of scrutiny. And next slide. Here's your definitions of applied research, basic research, and development. And then the next slide is your definitions of your sponsors for the FFRDCs. And we are at the end, Jennifer.
Carrie, that was awesome. Great presentation as always, very informative, lots of good content and great just verbal description of everything. So thanks so much for presenting with us again. We look forward to having you back in June on the back-to-back Thursdays, June 20th and June 27th for the SBIR, STTR webinars. If anyone's looking for today's recording, it's on our YouTube channel. And if you are watching our YouTube channel, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to our channel, and you've got access to almost 700 complimentary videos. Again, Carrie, thank you so much. Anything you wanted to add here at the end?
I will post about it. I know you're going to post about it, and I'm open to anybody having any other follow-on questions or anything about this presentation. R&D is an interesting area.
It certainly is. And again, today's recording is on our YouTube channel. If you're looking for the slides, they are over on slideshare.net, or they will be within the next couple hours. You can log in there with your LinkedIn credentials. This coming Friday, we do not have a webinar, and assuming that most people are going to be out of town for the holiday, but we'll resume with FAR Part 35 next week on Wednesday and 37 on Friday. Those links are on our website under the section called the FAR. Thanks again, Carrie. Thanks again, everybody who joined us live and anyone that's watching on the YouTube channel. Have a good rest of the day and good long weekend ahead.